Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet tall in her combat boots, weighing just 98 pounds soaking wet. The other recruits at Fort Benning towered over her like giants, their shadows completely covering her small frame during morning formation. When Drill Sergeant Thompson first laid eyes on her, he shook his head and muttered something about the military lowering standards. The whispers started immediately. "Look at Tiny Martinez," sneered Private Johnson, a 6'3" former college football player. "She probably needs a stepladder just to reach the rifle rack." The other recruits erupted in laughter, their voices echoing across the training grounds. Sarah kept her eyes forward, jaw clenched tight, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. During the first week of basic training, everything seemed designed to highlight her physical limitations. The obstacle course loomed impossibly high, the rope climb stretched endlessly upward, and even the standard M4 rifle felt heavy in her small hands. Other recruits breezed through challenges that left her struggling and gasping for breath. The instructors watched with barely concealed skepticism, exchanging glances that clearly said she wouldn't make it past the first month. Sarah had grown up in a small border town in Texas, the youngest of 4 children in a military family. Her father served 3 tours in Afghanistan, her older brother was deployed with the Marines, and her 2 sisters had both chosen different paths after high school. Everyone expected Sarah to follow her sisters into college or settle down with a nice job in town. Nobody expected the quiet girl who loved reading books and helping at the local animal shelter to announce she was enlisting in the army. "You're too small, mija," her grandmother had said, wrapping weathered hands around Sarah's tiny wrists. "The military is no place for someone like you. Why not become a teacher or a nurse instead?" Even her father, despite his pride in military service, had tried to discourage her. He knew firsthand how brutal the training could be, how unforgiving the military was to those who couldn't keep up physically. But Sarah had made up her mind after watching news coverage of a female sniper who had saved dozens of lives during a Taliban attack. The woman was small like her, barely visible behind her massive rifle, but her precision and courage had made all the difference. That night, Sarah had stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, seeing not weakness, but untapped potential. She would prove everyone wrong, including herself. The mockery intensified during weapons training. When the Barrett M82 50 caliber sniper rifle was introduced, the massive weapon looked almost comical next to Sarah's diminutive frame. The rifle weighed nearly 30 pounds unloaded, stood over 4 feet long, and kicked like an angry mule when fired. Watching Sarah struggle to even lift it properly sent the other recruits into fits of laughter. "Martinez, you sure you can handle that beast?" called out Private Stevens, another recruit who had taken particular pleasure in tormenting her. "Maybe we should get you a BB gun instead. Might be more your speed." The comment drew more snickers from the group, but Sarah noticed something else in their eyes now, genuine doubt about whether she belonged there at all. Sergeant Rodriguez, the weapons instructor, was a decorated veteran who had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had seen plenty of recruits come and go, watched tough-looking soldiers wash out while unlikely candidates surprised everyone. When he saw Sarah struggling with the Barrett, he didn't join in the mockery. Instead, he pulled her aside after training. "Listen, Martinez," he said quietly, his voice serious. "That rifle doesn't care how big you are. It cares about precision, patience, and heart. Size matters for some things in the military, but not for everything. You want to prove them wrong? Stop trying to muscle through everything and start thinking smarter." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the other recruits joke about her performance. Some of their comments cut deep, especially when they questioned whether she was taking up a spot that should have gone to someone more qualified. Doubt crept in like poison, making her wonder if everyone was right. Maybe she was kidding herself. Maybe she should quit before she got herself or someone else hurt in a real combat situation. The breaking point came during a live-fire exercise with the Barrett M82. Sarah was supposed to hit targets at various distances, starting at 500 meters and working up to 1,000 meters. The first shot nearly knocked her backward, the massive recoil sending shockwaves through her small frame. She missed the target completely, the bullet sailing high and wide. The second shot was worse, kicking dirt up 20 feet in front of the target. "Time!" shouted the instructor. Sarah had failed to hit a single target. The other recruits didn't even bother hiding their laughter anymore. Private Johnson stage whispered to his buddies about how they should start a betting pool on how long before she washed out. Even some of the instructors were shaking their heads, clearly losing faith in her ability to complete the program. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, picking at her food while replaying every missed shot in her mind. She could hear fragments of conversation from nearby tables, other recruits discussing her failure and speculating about when she would finally give up. The weight of their expectations, or lack thereof, pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. But as she sat there, something shifted inside her. The doubt and shame began transforming into something harder, more determined. She thought about her father's stories from Afghanistan, about impossible missions completed through skill and perseverance, rather than brute strength. She remembered the female sniper from the news, probably facing similar doubts and criticism before proving herself in combat. Sarah pushed back from the table and walked outside into the cooling desert evening. The base stretched out before her, lights twinkling in the distance like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring more training, more challenges, and probably more mockery, but she was done trying to be something she wasn't. It was time to discover what she could become when she stopped apologizing for her size and started using her unique strengths. The real test was still coming, though she didn't know it yet. In just a few weeks, everything would change during an unexpected desert survival exercise that would push every recruit to their absolute limits. Sarah Martinez, the girl everyone expected to fail, was about to show them what true strength really looked like. 3 weeks later, Sarah had shown modest improvement in most areas but still struggled with the Barrett M82. The massive rifle remained her greatest challenge, though she had managed to hit a few targets at shorter ranges. The other recruits had mostly stopped their overt mockery, but she could still feel their skeptical glances whenever weapons training began. Most had written her off as someone who would eventually find her way to a support role far from any real combat. The announcement came during morning formation on a particularly hot Tuesday. Colonel Hayes, the base commander, stood before the assembled recruits with a stern expression that immediately commanded attention. Behind him, several instructors carried clipboards and wore the kind of serious faces that meant trouble for someone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes began, his voice carrying across the formation, "in 2 days you will begin Operation Desert Trial. This is an unscheduled exercise designed to test everything you've learned so far under real-world conditions. You will be divided into teams of 4 and dropped at various locations in the surrounding desert with minimal supplies and equipment." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Desert survival training wasn't supposed to happen until much later in their program, and the way the colonel described it as unscheduled suggested this wasn't a routine exercise. Something had prompted this sudden change in their training timeline. Each team will be assigned specific objectives to complete over a 72-hour period. The colonel continued. Navigation, communication, tactical scenarios, and equipment transport across varied terrain. The teams that perform best will receive advanced training opportunities. Those who fail, he paused meaningfully. Well, let's just say not everyone standing here will graduate with their class. Sarah felt her stomach drop. A 72-hour desert exercise would test every weakness she had been struggling with: physical endurance, equipment handling, team dynamics under stress, all areas where her small size had been a constant disadvantage. She could already imagine the groans from whoever got stuck with her as a teammate. The team assignments were posted that afternoon, and Sarah's fears were confirmed. She had been paired with 3 of the strongest recruits in their class: Private Johnson, the former football player who had tormented her from day one; Private Stevens, who never missed an opportunity to question her presence; and surprisingly, Private Chen, a quiet but capable recruit who had generally stayed neutral in the ongoing speculation about Sarah's abilities. "Great," Johnson muttered when he saw the list. "We get stuck with Tiny Martinez for the most important exercise of basic training. There goes our shot at advanced placement." Stevens nodded in agreement while Chen remained diplomatically silent. The equipment briefing revealed the full scope of their challenge. Each team would carry standard field gear, communication equipment, navigation tools, and enough food and water for 3 days. More importantly for Sarah's situation, each team would be assigned one Barrett M82 rifle with ammunition, which they would need to transport and potentially use during the exercise. Sergeant Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside after the briefing. "Martinez, I know what you're thinking and you need to stop it right now. This exercise isn't about who can carry the most weight or run the fastest. It's about problem solving, teamwork, and adapting to unexpected situations. Those things don't care about your size." But Sarah could see the doubt in even his encouraging words. The Barrett alone weighed more than 30 pounds, not including ammunition. Add that to a full pack, water, and other shared equipment, and she would be carrying nearly her own body weight across desert terrain in extreme heat. Mathematically, it seemed impossible. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk running calculations in her head, trying to figure out how to carry her share of equipment without slowing down the team. Every scenario she imagined ended, with her teammates having to carry extra weight while she struggled behind. The thought of proving every skeptic right made her sick to her stomach. She slipped out of the barracks and made her way to the training grounds. Under the desert stars, she found herself staring at a Barrett M82 secured in the weapons rack. The massive rifle gleamed dully in the moonlight, looking more like a piece of artillery than something a person could carry. She had improved with it slightly, but carrying it across miles of desert terrain was an entirely different challenge. The next morning brought final preparations and last-minute briefings. Teams studied maps of their assigned sectors, planned routes, and discussed logistics. Sarah's team barely included her in their planning, with Johnson taking charge and essentially treating her as excess baggage they would have to manage. "Look, Martinez," Johnson said during their team meeting, "we all know this is going to be tough for you. Just try to keep up and don't slow us down. We'll figure out how to distribute the gear so you're not carrying too much." His tone wasn't entirely unkind, but it stung nonetheless. Even his attempts at accommodation reinforced her status as the weak link. Chen spoke up for the first time. "Actually, I think we should hear Sarah's thoughts on the route planning. She scored highest on the navigation tests." It was true. Sarah's attention to detail and patience with map reading had served her well in classroom exercises. But Johnson and Stevens barely acknowledged the comment, too focused on the physical demands of the mission. The teams were scheduled to deploy at dawn the following day. Transport trucks would drop them at designated starting points. Then they would be on their own for 3 days. Success would be measured by completion of assigned objectives, team cohesion, equipment accountability, and time to finish. The exact nature of their objectives remained classified until deployment. Sarah spent her final evening writing a letter to her family. She didn't mention her fears or the mockery she had endured. Instead, she wrote about the desert landscape, the challenging training, and how much she was learning. But as she sealed the envelope, she wondered if she would be writing a very different kind of letter in a few days, one explaining why she had washed out of basic training. The pre-dawn darkness was cold and quiet as the recruits loaded into transport trucks. Sarah sat wedged between her teammates, feeling the weight of the Barrett M82 that would soon become her responsibility. The rifle was secured in a protective case, but she knew that in a few hours she would need to carry it across terrain that had defeated many stronger people than herself. As the truck rumbled through the desert toward their drop point, Colonel Hayes's voice crackled over the radio with a final message. "Remember, recruits, this exercise will test everything you think you know about your own capabilities. Some of you will discover strengths you didn't know you had. Others will face limitations you didn't know existed. Either way, you'll learn something important about yourselves out there." Sarah stared out the window at the vast expanse of desert rolling past in the gray pre-dawn light. Somewhere out there waited a test that would either break her completely or forge her into something stronger than anyone believed possible. In a few hours, she would find out which version of herself would emerge from the desert. The girl everyone expected to fail was about to face the challenge that would define the rest of her military career. The transport truck ground to a halt just as the first pale light of dawn began creeping across the horizon. Sarah's stomach churned as Sergeant Williams opened the tailgate and barked orders for immediate deployment. The desert stretched endlessly, in every direction, broken only by scattered rock formations and sparse vegetation that offered little promise of shade or shelter. "Team Delta, this is your stop," Williams announced, consulting his clipboard. "Your objective packet is sealed, and not to be opened until you've reached your first waypoint at grid coordinates 347.892. That's approximately 8 miles northeast of here. You have 72 hours to complete all assigned tasks and reach D, the extraction point. Clock starts now." Johnson immediately took charge, shouldering his heavy pack and grabbing the sealed orders. Stevens and Chen followed suit, efficiently distributing shared equipment according to their pre-planned assignments. Sarah stood beside the growing pile of gear, knowing her moment of truth had arrived. The Barrett M82 case lay at her feet like a 30-pound anchor that would either drag her down or become the weight that forged her strength. "Martinez, you sure about this?" Chen asked quietly, genuine concern in his voice. It's not too late to ask for a different assignment distribution. Even he doubted her ability to carry the massive rifle across the desert, despite being the only teammate who had consistently treated her with respect. Sarah knelt beside the rifle case, her small hands working the latches with steady determination. "I've got it," she said simply. The Barrett emerged from its protective case, gleaming black metal and precision engineering. It weighed more than some of the packs her teammates were carrying, but she had made her decision weeks ago. No more apologizing for what she couldn't do. Time to discover what she could. The first mile passed in relative comfort. The desert air was still cool from the night and the terrain remained fairly level. Sarah found a rhythm, carrying the Barrett in a modified position that distributed its weight across her shoulders and core. Her teammates maintained their skeptical silence, but at least they weren't openly mocking her yet. By the third mile, the sun had risen high enough to turn the desert into a furnace. The temperature climbed steadily toward what would eventually reach 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Johnson called for the first water break, and Sarah gratefully set the Barrett down, feeling the immediate relief as the crushing weight left her shoulders. "How you holding up, Martinez?" Stevens asked, and for the first time his tone carried more curiosity than condescension. Her face was flushed red from exertion, sweat already staining her uniform, but she was still moving and hadn't complained once. "I'm good," Sarah replied, though privately she was calculating water consumption and wondering how her small body would handle the increasing heat. She had read extensively about desert survival, knowing that her size would actually be an advantage in terms of water needs and heat management, but theory was different from the reality of carrying 30 pounds of rifle across shifting sand and broken rock. The fourth mile introduced their first real challenge. The relatively smooth terrain gave way to a series of rocky ridges and deep washes that required careful navigation and occasional scrambling over obstacles. The Barrett became unwieldy, its length making it difficult to maneuver through tight spaces between rocks. Johnson and Stevens were starting to pull ahead, their longer legs and greater strength allowing them to maintain pace despite the increasing difficulty. Chen stayed closer to Sarah, not obviously helping but positioning himself to offer assistance if she faltered. Sarah appreciated his discretion, but was determined not to need it. "There's the first waypoint," Johnson called out, pointing to a distinctive rock formation about half a mile ahead. "Let's see what our actual mission is." The prospect of learning their specific objectives provided motivation for the final push to reach the coordinates specified in their orders. Sarah's shoulders were screaming by the time they reached the waypoint, but she had maintained pace with her team. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could carry the Barrett across difficult terrain without becoming a burden. The small victory felt significant, even though she knew this was only the beginning of their 72-hour test. Johnson tore open the sealed orders with eager anticipation. As team leader, he read the contents first, his expression growing more serious with each line. "Okay, this is more complex than I expected," he announced. "We have 3 separate objectives scattered across a 15-mile area. Reconnaissance of suspected enemy positions, establishment of overwatch positions, and," he paused, looking directly at Sarah, "precision elimination of multiple long-range targets using the Barrett M82. The implications hit everyone immediately. This wasn't just a survival exercise, it was a combat simulation that specifically required sniper skills. Sarah's marksmanship with the Barrett had been mediocre at best during training, and now their team's success might depend on her ability to make precision shots under field conditions. The first target area is 12 miles from here, Johnson continued, consulting the detailed map included with their orders. We need to establish Overwatch by 1800 hours today and be prepared for live-fire exercises at dawn tomorrow. Failure to complete the sniper mission results in automatic failure for the entire team. Stevens looked skeptical. So our success depends on Martinez hitting targets with a rifle she struggled with in perfect conditions on a shooting range? Now she has to do it after carrying the thing across 12 miles of desert? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could feel the weight of their doubt settling on her shoulders alongside the physical weight of the Barrett. But something had changed during those first 4 miles of desert hiking. The mockery that had once made her doubt herself now sparked a different emotion, determination mixed with a growing sense of her own capabilities. She had carried the massive rifle farther than anyone expected, including herself. Her body was adapting, finding ways to handle the load that her mind had insisted were impossible. "Let me see the map," Sarah said quietly, extending her hand toward Johnson. For a moment he hesitated, as if unsure why the smallest member of the team would have anything valuable to contribute to route planning. But something in her tone, a new confidence that hadn't been there before, made him hand over the documents. Sarah studied the topographical map with the same attention to detail that had made her successful in navigation exercises. But now she was looking at it differently, considering not just the most direct route but the approach that would best serve their mission requirements. The terrain between their current position and the target area was varied and challenging, with several possible routes that offered different advantages and risks. "If we take the direct route through this valley system," she said, pointing to the obvious path Johnson had been considering, "we'll make good time, but we'll be exposed to observation from these ridges. Anyone conducting counter-surveillance would spot us easily." She traced an alternative route with her finger. "This path is longer and harder, but it keeps us on the reverse slope of these hills. We'll have better concealment and multiple options for establishing Overwatch positions." Chen leaned in to study her analysis. "She's right about the exposure. And look here, the longer route actually gives us better approach angles to the target area. We'd have multiple shooting positions instead of being locked into whatever we can reach from the direct approach." Johnson and Stevens exchanged glances. The small recruit they had written off was demonstrating tactical thinking that neither of them had considered. More importantly, she was thinking beyond just surviving the march to actually completing their mission successfully. "That route adds at least 3 miles, Stevens pointed out. "Can you handle carrying that rifle for 15 miles instead of 12? His question was direct but no longer mocking. He genuinely wanted to know if she could deliver what their mission required. Sarah looked back at the Barrett M82, her constant companion and greatest challenge. 15 miles would push her to the absolute limit of her physical capabilities, but she was beginning to understand something important about limits. They weren't fixed boundaries but moving targets that shifted based on necessity and determination. "I can do 15 miles, she said with quiet conviction. "The question is whether you trust me to make the shots when we get there." The silence that followed Sarah's question stretched across the desert, like the heat wave shimmering in the distance. Johnson, Stevens, and Chen all stared at her, processing the transformation from the struggling recruit they had written off to this small but determined soldier, asking them to trust her with their mission success. "All right, Martinez," Johnson said finally, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. "We'll take your route, but if you can't make those shots tomorrow morning, we all fail together." It wasn't exactly a vote of confidence, but it was acknowledgement that she had become a full member of the team rather than dead weight they were managing. The revised route led them through terrain that seemed designed to test every aspect of desert survival. Rocky canyons where the Barrett had to be passed carefully between team members, sandy washes that grabbed at their boots with each step, and exposed ridges where the sun beat down mercilessly. Sarah's small size actually became an advantage in the narrow passages, allowing her to navigate spaces where her larger teammates struggled. By the 7th mile, something remarkable was happening. Sarah had found her rhythm with the massive rifle, developing a carrying technique that worked with her body rather than against it. She moved with growing confidence, no longer apologizing for rest breaks or asking if someone else wanted to. Take the Barrett. The weapon had become an extension of herself, heavy but manageable. "I don't get it," Stevens muttered to Chen during one of their brief breaks. "She should be falling apart by now. That rifle weighs more than my little sister, and Martinez isn't much bigger." But there was admiration in his confusion rather than mockery. Chen had been watching Sarah carefully throughout the day. "She's not trying to be stronger than she is," he observed. "She's being exactly as strong as she needs to be. There's a difference." It was an insight that spoke to something deeper about the nature of strength and determination. The afternoon brought their most challenging terrain yet. The route Sarah had chosen led through a series of steep-sided arroyos carved by ancient floods. The dry creek beds offered concealment, but required constant climbing up and down rocky walls that turned each mile into a grueling test of endurance. During one particularly difficult ascent, Sarah found herself separated from her teammates by about 50 yards. The Barrett had caught on an outcropping of rock, and by the time she worked it free, the others had moved ahead. For a moment, she was alone in the vast desert, carrying a rifle that seemed impossibly large for someone her size. But instead of panic or self-pity, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity. This was exactly where she belonged, not despite her size, but because of who she had chosen to become. The Barrett was no longer a burden proving her inadequacy. It had become the tool that would define her transformation from someone others expected to fail into someone who simply refused to quit. "Martinez, you good back there?" Johnson's voice echoed off the canyon walls. His concern was genuine now, no longer the barely concealed hope that she would wash out and stop being his problem. "On my way," Sarah called back, adjusting her grip on the Barrett and finding handholds in the rocky wall. The climb was difficult, but everything about this day had been difficult. She was learning that difficult and impossible were not the same thing. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they finally reached the area designated for their overwatch position. The terrain Sarah had chosen provided multiple options for concealment and fields of fire, exactly as she had predicted from studying the topographical maps. Her tactical analysis was proving as accurate as her route planning. "Not bad, Martinez," Johnson admitted as they surveyed their options. "This gives us everything we need for tomorrow's mission." He was studying the target area through binoculars, calculating ranges and wind patterns. Shooting positions from this ridge would put us at about 800 meters from the primary targets, well within the Barrett's effective range. Sarah set the rifle down for the first time in hours, feeling the familiar relief as the weight left her shoulders. But she also felt something else: accomplishment. She had carried the Barrett M82 across more than 12 miles of desert terrain without slowing her team or requiring assistance. More importantly, she had done it while making tactical contributions that improved their mission prospects. "Tomorrow's the real test," Stevens said, no longer bothering to hide his skepticism about Sarah's shooting abilities. "Carrying the rifle is one thing. Using it effectively is something else entirely." He wasn't being cruel, just realistic about the challenges they still faced. Sarah understood his concerns because she shared them. Her marksmanship with the Barrett during training had been inconsistent at best. The massive rifle's recoil had overwhelmed her small frame repeatedly, throwing off her follow-up shots and making it difficult to develop the rhythm that precision shooting required. Tomorrow, she would need to perform under pressure, with her team's success depending on her accuracy. But something had changed during the day's march. The Barrett no longer felt like an enemy she was battling. Hours of carrying it had created familiarity, even intimacy with the weapon. She understood its balance points, its weight distribution, the way it responded to different carrying positions. That physical relationship might translate into better shooting performance. As they established their overnight position and prepared for the final phase of their mission, Sarah found herself thinking about the female sniper who had inspired her to enlist. That woman had probably faced similar doubts, similar questions about whether someone her size could handle such powerful weapons effectively, but she had found a way to make it work, to use precision and technique to overcome any disadvantage in size or strength. The desert evening was surprisingly cold after the brutal heat of the day. Sarah sat cleaning the Barrett with methodical care, checking every component and ensuring the rifle was ready for tomorrow's challenges. Her teammates had initially questioned her obsessive attention to weapon maintenance, but now they watched with growing respect as she demonstrated knowledge and skill they hadn't expected. "You know," Chen said quietly as they shared an MRE dinner, "I've been thinking about what you said this morning about limits being moving targets. I think you've moved yours pretty far today." It was perhaps the highest compliment she had received from any of her teammates during their entire training program. Johnson, who had been their unofficial leader throughout the exercise, looked at Sarah with something approaching admiration. "I have to admit, Martinez, you've surprised me today. I didn't think you could carry that rifle across the street, let alone 12 miles through the desert. But carrying it and using it effectively are different challenges." "I know," Sarah replied simply. She wasn't offended by his honesty because she knew he was right. Everything up to this point had been preparation. Tomorrow morning would determine whether her transformation was complete or whether she would prove that some limitations couldn't be overcome through determination alone. As the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Sarah lay in her sleeping bag thinking about the day's achievements and tomorrow's challenges. She had proven she could carry the Barrett M82 across difficult terrain without becoming a burden to her team. She had demonstrated tactical knowledge that contributed to their mission planning. But the ultimate test still awaited, actually using the massive rifle to hit precision targets under field conditions. The weight of expectation settled on her shoulders like the physical weight of the Barrett itself. 3 teammates were counting on her accuracy. Their mission success depended on her ability to overcome every limitation that had plagued her marksmanship training. Tomorrow morning would reveal whether the small recruit everyone had mocked could actually deliver when it mattered most. But as Sarah drifted toward sleep, she felt something she had never experienced during her military training: complete confidence in her own capabilities. She had spent the day discovering what she could accomplish when she stopped apologizing for what she wasn't and focused on becoming exactly who she needed to be. Tomorrow would simply be the next step in that ongoing transformation. Dawn came slowly to the desert, painting the eastern horizon in shades of gold and orange that gradually pushed back the purple darkness. Sarah had been awake for 30 minutes already, using the quiet time to prepare both herself and the Barrett M82 for the morning's challenges. The massive rifle lay beside her sleeping bag, cleaned and checked multiple times during the restless night. Her teammates stirred as the light grew stronger, each dealing with pre-mission nerves in their own way. Johnson consulted his watch repeatedly and studied the target area through binoculars. Stevens did push-ups and stretching exercises, burning off nervous energy. Chen sat quietly, methodically preparing his equipment with the same calm precision he brought to everything. "Targets should be active starting at 6:30, Johnson announced, reading from their mission orders. "We have a 4-hour window to complete all shooting objectives. 3 primary targets at ranges between 600 and 1,000 meters, plus 2 secondary targets if conditions allow." He looked directly at Sarah. "This is all on you, Martinez. Everything we've done up to this point doesn't matter if you can't make these shots." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility but no longer feeling crushed by it. The previous day's march had taught her something crucial about the relationship between pressure and performance. The greater the stakes, the clearer her mind became. Instead of being overwhelmed by what could go wrong, she found herself focused on exactly what needed to happen. The shooting position they selected was a natural depression in the rocky ridge that provided excellent concealment while offering clear lines of sight to the target area. Sarah settled behind the Barrett, adjusting her position until the rifle felt like a natural extension of her body. The familiarity she had developed during yesterday's carry translated into comfort behind the weapon, Range to primary target Alpha is 847 meters, Chen reported, having taken on the role of spotter. Wind is variable, mostly calm with occasional gusts from the southwest at about 5 miles per hour. Temperature is 72 degrees and climbing. His calm professionalism helped settle everyone's nerves. Sarah chambered around and settled into her shooting position. The Barrett's massive weight, which had seemed like such an impossible burden when she first encountered it, now felt reassuring and stable. She had learned to work with the rifle's characteristics rather than fighting against them, using her small size to create a more stable shooting platform than larger shooters might achieve. Through the rifle's scope, the target area came into sharp focus. The objectives were human-shaped silhouettes positioned at various ranges and angles, designed to simulate real combat scenarios. Each target had specific scoring zones that required precision rather than just hitting anywhere in the general vicinity. Target Alpha is active, Johnson whispered, spotting movement in the distant target area. Take your time, Martinez. Steady breathing, smooth trigger pull, everything you learned in training. His encouragement carried none of the skepticism that had characterized his earlier interactions with her. Sarah controlled her breathing, finding the natural respiratory pause where her body was most stable. The Barrett's crosshairs settled on the center mass of the distant target. At 847 meters, the human-shaped silhouette looked impossibly small through the scope. Wind, bullet drop, and the tremendous recoil of the .50 caliber round all had to be calculated and compensated for. The shot when it came surprised even Sarah with its perfection. The Barrett roared and kicked, the massive recoil absorbed by proper positioning and technique rather than overwhelming her small frame. Through the scope, she watched the target indicator flash, signaling a perfect center hit. Her teammates erupted in surprise celebration. "Holy shit, Martinez," Stevens exclaimed, forgetting military courtesy in his excitement. "That was dead center. I've never seen a better shot from that range." His amazement was genuine and complete. The recruit he had written off had just demonstrated marksmanship that exceeded anything they had seen during training. But Sarah was already focusing on the second target, which had appeared at a range of 923 meters. The success of the first shot had eliminated any remaining doubt about her capabilities. The Barrett felt like an extension of her will, a precision instrument that responded to her intent rather than fighting against her limitations. The second shot was even better than the first, if such a thing was possible. The target fell immediately, indicating another perfect hit. Chen, maintaining his role as spotter, called out corrections that weren't needed. Sarah was shooting with a level of precision that made external guidance unnecessary. Target Charlie. Funsau 47 meters, Johnson announced, his voice tight with excitement. This was the longest range they would attempt, pushing the Barrett M82 toward the limit of its effective range for their mission parameters. A successful hit would demonstrate not just competence but genuine expertise with the weapon system. Sarah chambered the final round and settled into her shooting position. At over 1,000 meters, environmental factors became increasingly significant. A slight change in wind direction or speed could send the massive .50 caliber bullet wide of the target. The calculations required were complex, involving bullet trajectory, wind drift, and the target's movement patterns. But Sarah had found something during the previous shots that transcended technical calculations. The Barrett had become an extension of her intuition, rather than just a mechanical tool. She could feel the